So the world leaders have started arriving for the much-awaited G20 Summit, and New Delhi, of course, at this moment is busy in putting out a wholesome welcome for the world leaders. The 20 countries and their leaders will share the same platform. Now, these are the leaders of some of the biggest economies of the world, indeed, the very biggest of the economies. So a lot is expected in the next few days, but the question is this. India is hosting the G20 Summit. It has pulled out all stops to welcome the world leaders. But what's in it for India? So let's try and decode this in our cover story tonight on Fineprint. Now, the G20 presidency is something that changes every year. It's a rotating presidency, and this year it had been India's turn. Now, that's been the norm since 2008, when the baton was, of course, passed last year. New Delhi was sharp and upfront with a clear vision on how it wanted to lead the G20. In one instance, the G20 Sherpa, Amitabh Kant, even said that the G20 grouping is much more important. This is what Amitabh Kant said, that the G20 grouping is much more important than the United Nations Security Council. Simply because India wants to achieve three things: inclusivity, ambition, and action-driven solutions. And the United Nations Security Council has failed in all these prayers. Now, this is exactly where India, of course, comes in. The IMF has said that 80% of the growth is in fact going to come from the emerging markets. So if countries like India are going to drive the future growth, then their presence, of course, has become more of a necessity than a formality. That there's been a visible push for the global south, and India's demand of bringing the African Union into G20 is not without basis. After all, 6 of the 12 fastest growing economies are all from Africa. And India finds itself at the center of global trade discussions. The G20 accounts for 85% of the global GDP. And why not? It accounts for countries such as the United States and China, which are the big power hitters. It also accounts for 75% of the world trade and 2/3 of the global population. And India aims to leverage its position to attract more investments. The 4 things are definitely on the cards: fast-tracking negotiations for free trade agreement, ease of doing business, a modern infrastructure plan, and also deepening trade relations. However, the global trade landscape faces a pressing challenge. This is about the rising food prices that have been triggered by the Russia-Ukraine war. Remember, this crisis had disrupted the food supply chains worldwide. So as the G20 convenes, India would like to address these issues and ensure certain affordable solutions. The multilateral dialogue platforms such as the G20 have their own set of challenges, and one of the biggest challenges is that of arriving at a consensus. In the ministerial meetings so far, no joint statements have been issued by the members due to differences, and there is no doubt whatsoever that this summit is also going to be a litmus test for New Delhi's role as a mediator. Now, India or Bharat, whichever name that you want to call this nation as, is certain of one thing: that India has realized its standing in the global stage, and the world has taken note of it as well. And it will be very interesting to see as to how the G20 Summit, of course, pans out in New Delhi. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what this G20 Summit in New Delhi means for India, we're being joined by Dr. Srikanth Kondapalli. He is the Dean of the School of International Studies and Professor in Chinese Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He is joining us live on the broadcast. Now, Professor, this is a big-ticket event that is happening in the Indian capital. The G20 leaders are going to be here this week. And, tell us what's in it for India.
Oh, many things that could be part of the deal at G20. This is the biggest grouping in terms of the global economic, status. So India hosting this for the first time, that has a lot of implications for the economy of India, investments, trade, digitalization, a host of other things. So this is actually very big for India at this moment. And specific aspects, of course, there are 3-4 issues that India is trying to flag. One is, of course, the resurrection of the economic growth rates
Right.
after the substantial losses that we faced during the COVID pandemic when we had negative growth rates. So how do we resurrect economic growth rates, number one? Number two, in terms of implementing the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, on healthcare, education, literacy, life expectancy, and host of other things, drinking water and infrastructure, soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So the SDGs are the second main priority for India.
Right.
Third is climate change issues. Although India is not a big emitter of greenhouse gases, it is still the United States and China, which are the major greenhouse gas emitters. Yet India also feels the pinch of environmental degradation and rising temperature, floods, drought, and other things. And so the climate change issues are the third most important aspect. Fourth, I think,
Right.
is related to digitalization of trade, partly because of the supply chain disruptions during the COVID-19. There is an urge, and Japan, Australia, India have cobbled up the supply chain resilience initiative a couple of years ago, and digitalization provides. And we saw India making substantial progress in terms of the digitalization. UK, other UPI and other digital currencies.
Absolutely,
and,
Professor.
so
I think
on.
the points that you've highlighted. There are several points of convergence on which the different nations can, of course, agree upon. But the G20 is also a large tent. It has countries such as the United States, which has a fierce rivalry with China. There is this war that is unfolding in Ukraine, and therefore the United States and Russia don't see eye to eye with each other. And in this context, the West, of course, is looking at India as a possible mediator. What sort of a role do you think that India can actually play in trying to get all of these nations and try to get them to all pull in the same direction? Because the big challenge of G20 so far in all the ministerial meetings is that there's been no joint statement that's been issued at all. So at the summit, which takes place this weekend, do you expect a joint statement to come out?
Well, what you mentioned is a geopolitical issue, and what I was trying to highlight is the economic basis, that is G20. When it was resurrected after the global financial crisis in 2008, it was primarily meant for economic issues, and the instituting of Sherpas created that space for political issues with security issues and so on and so forth.
Right.
And what we saw after South Korea introduced the Sherpa system, we have an increasing debate on the geopolitical and security aspects. And Bali summit has been, it took really a toll in terms of the Ukrainian conflict that you just mentioned. And also, of course, the other geopolitical issues, terrorism and non-traditional security challenges. Having said that, it is true that there is no joint statement issued, but on about 56 items that were discussed in the last 220 meetings conducted in different cities in India, there is a lot of consensus, nearly 90% consensus on sustainable development goals, on digitalization, on climate change issues, on taxation, on trade. So there is a lot of consensus.
Absolutely, indeed. We're completely out of time, Professor. I think we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.